Hey everybody, it's Atheist for the Cause, and I have an article review for you. And this one is a little sad, but let's get into it. Matt Walsh, courts in Europe have sentenced a baby to death. This is socialized medicine. There's a horrific case over in the UK that hasn't gotten a ton of attention here, but it should. If we look closely, we may see our future and our present. Now this is a little hyperbolic because it's definitely misleading, and that's what you get with the Blaze. We don't have socialized medicine in the U.S. What Obamacare is right now is all it is regulatory reform. So basically, Obamacare forces regulations onto insurance companies. We don't actually have any sort of insurance run by the government on a large scale. Charlie Gard is a 10-month-old baby who suffers from a rare genetic disorder called mitochondrial DNA depletion syndrome. It's a horrendous condition that leads to organ malfunction, brain damage, and other symptoms. The hospital that had been treating the boy, Grey Ormond Street Hospital for Children in London, made the determination that nothing more can be done for him, and he must be taken off of life support. He should die with dignity, they said. The parents, Chris Gard and Connie Yates, disagreed. This is the very crucial thing to understand. They are not insisting that Gosh be forced to keep Charlie on life support. Rather, they want to take him out of hospital and to America to undergo a form of experimental therapy that a doctor here had already agreed to administer. Chris and Connie raised over $1.6 million to fund the last-ditch effort to save their child's life. All they needed the British hospital to do was release their child into their care, which doesn't seem like a terrible burdensome request. They would then leave the country and try their luck with the treatment here. However slim the chance of success may have been, it was better than just sitting by and watching their baby die. Here's where things get truly insane and barbaric. The hospital refused to give Charlie back to his parents. The matter ended up in the courts, and finally in the last several hours, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that the parents should be barred from taking their son to the United States for treatment. According to the Human Rights Court, it is Charlie's human right that expire in his hospital bed in London. Again, hyperbolic there, but you get the point. The parents are not allowed to try and save his life. It is not in his best interest to simply die, they ruled. Or it is in his best interest to simply die, they ruled. And this is the problem when you have the government deciding over the parents. And this is why I fight for parental rights and parents to make decisions to a pretty extreme extent, I would say. I would, in general, we should side with the parents because they're going to do the most. It's just biological nature. They're typically going to do the most to try to find a way to save the baby's life and watch out for the baby. Now, they have that emotional attachment. Now, when it comes to the government, that baby's just a number to them. And, so what you get is they're looking at cost-benefit analysis of how much it costs to keep the baby there, things like that, and then they're going to make their own moral judgment. And on top of that, and their morals might not line up with the morals of the parents. And who's the decision maker, in the government? And with different governments, you're going to get all different kinds of decisions. Morally, where with your parents are your parents. So it says, in Europe, death with dignity supersedes all other rights. In Europe, a mother may kill her baby and she is not allowed to keep him alive. Again, barbaric. I've heard many people rationalize this demented decision by saying the doctors know best. That may well be relevant and true in situations where family members are trying to force doctors to administer treatments that the medical professionals, know will not work. I agree with that here. There are times when where the medical professionals can supersede what the parents want, but this does not seem like one of those cases. But that is not what's happening here. The only thing these parents are trying to force the doctors to do is relax their grip so the child can be taken to different doctors in a different country. The doctors may be the final authority on what kinds of medical measures they personally should take, but they are not the final authority over life itself. It is one thing for them to say, I will not do this treatment. It's quite another for them to say, you are not allowed to have this treatment done by anyone. You must die. The former is reasonable. The latter is euthanasia. This baby is being euthanized by barbarians. I've actually talked to European doctors and American doctors, and because I have epilepsy, and I wanted to get a second opinion on, how my doctor in the United States was treating my epilepsy. And they basically, like, the way the United States was operating was completely different than the way the European doctors were operating. Like, the European doctors literally said, because the European doctors literally said that, like, we would not do that at all. And the American doctors were, like, considering changing how they were treating me. And it was like it was completely bipolar. And, if I wasn't happy with how the American doctors were treating me, and European doctors had a different way to go about it, I should be able to go to Europe and get treated there in a different manner if that's what I want. But then apparently that's not what's being allowed here. It's you go into the European system, and once they have your child, that's it. They make the decision, and they're not even going to let other doctors have insight. I've seen some on social media calling this case unimaginable and mind-boggling. It is certainly awful, but unfortunately it does not boggle my mind or exceed the limits of my imagination. These sorts of cases are inevitable in Europe, and unless we make a drastic change of course, they will soon become commonplace here. The stage is already set. Just consider these three factors. 1. This is what happens with socialized medicine. If the state runs the healthcare system, ultimately they will be the ones who decide whose life is worth saving and whose isn't. That's not just a byproduct of socialized medicine, it's the point. And it is especially risky to cede the sort of power to the government when you live in a culture that doesn't fundamentally value parental rights or human life. Which brings us to the last 2 points. And, it's not just individual cases, and it's not just extreme cases like this. We're talking about, how about how they treat smokers, for instance? How they, will smokers be able to get certain treatments? Will the elderly be able to get certain treatments? Americans have long complained about rationing that happens in legitimate socialized medicine, where it's government run. Things like, the biggest government run healthcare that we tend to talk about is the NHS in the UK. But there are other government run healthcares, but especially in Europe. And there's a lot of rationing that happens where they say, this person's too old for that, for that treatment, and it's not because that someone of that age can't get that treatment. It's because they don't want to use the resources on that person. That might be expensive, but that person should be able to decide whether they want to spend the resources. This is what happens when parental rights are subordinate to the state. This case came down, and this is point number 2. This case came down to the question of who should have the final say over a child. Should it be the parents, or should it be a collection of doctors, judges, and bureaucrats? And if the parents don't take precedence in a life or death situation, can it really be said that they have rights at all? If I have no say when my child's very life is at stake, when do I have say? The way things are headed in Europe, a parent may have some jurisdiction over the minor minutiae of daily life, but when it comes to the major issues, how a child is to be educated, how he is to live, what he is to believe, when he is to die, it is increasingly up to the state to determine. As a medical ethics expert at Oxford put it, parental rights are at the heart of most big medical decisions. However, there are limits. Chris and Connie apparently reached the limits of their parental authority and now must sit back obediently while their son dies in agony. Limits, you see. You're only a parent up to a certain point, and when your relationship to your child doesn't count for anything anymore. That's how things are in the UK, and the US, as always, is close behind. And there's more to this. This actually gets so complicated when you start thinking of beyond just the child. For instance, if a parent makes a decision to, end the life of their child or whatever, take them off of life support or something like that, well, they're going to have some closure, and they were in control. They're just the passenger in this. Think about when you're driving down the road and you're in control, you're the driver. You can face lots of dangerous situations, but you don't get too worked up about it because you're in control. Now, think about when you're the passenger, and even like a minor cutoff that's not even really putting you in danger, and a lot of people will freak out as a passenger because they can't do anything. People hit the brakes on the passenger side even though there are no brakes there because they want some sort of control. And so there are all kinds of extra damage that can be done too, from a parent just having no control. Number 3, this is what happens when human life is not considered sacred. But what really is the downside of taking the child to the US for treatment? It may not work okay, but why not try? They raised enough money to pay for it. It's not like this child would be going to a third world country for some barbaric practice either. We're talking about the United States, where it literally has the best. People are going to laugh at this, but the United States literally has the best medical technology in the world. And, the problem is our costs are high, but our procedures are very sound here. And, ethically, we try hard to not harm patients and not to be too experimental, but we'll pick our places to go out with experiments and try to save a life. And if a doctor in the United States was willing to try this, shouldn't it be up to the parents to make the determination on if the risk is worth the reward? I don't really like the argument, what's there to lose? What's the harm? Well, who knows? Maybe the baby could die in a worse way or something like that. But I really think that decision should be up to the parent, not the government. While the court answers it's just not worth the trouble. They've weighed all the variables using their various formulations, and they've decided that it makes no sense to go through all this trouble on the slim hope of saving this one measly life. Yes, they've used the excuse that the baby is suffering, and I'm sure he is suffering, but that doesn't explain why the parents should be prevented from pursuing every option to ease that suffering. Death is not a treatment plan for suffering. Death is death. Death is the destruction of life. We all must experience it someday, but the inevitability of death does not negate the value of and dignity of life. So this is, I think most people would agree with this, but it is a controversial paragraph. And what I would say is you don't have to agree with it to side with the parents here. Because basically you just have to stand up for parental rights. Shouldn't the parents be deciding if, the chance to survive and some extra short-term suffering is worth it? Or is, just ending it, worth the ending the suffering now and ruining the chance that the baby could survive? I mean, this is really close to a suicide type argument. Should people be able to commit suicide or no? And in the United States, for the most part, we don't allow people to commit suicide, and for the most part, we try to keep people alive as much as possible. Now, they go on to say what this really comes down to is that the powers that be don't see the fundamental value in life. That's why you'll hear these people speak more often of the dignity of death than the dignity of life. They preach about the right to die, but not the right to live. Again, the parents should be deciding, not the parents should be using their own moral worldview, not the government. And the laws in Europe reflect this emphasis on death instead of life. Over there, they kill children in the womb and euthanize them when they come out. They even euthanize alcoholics and depressives and other people who are by no means terminally ill. Once the right to die has been placed over the right to live, death will continue claiming new ground and eating into life more and more. Death is a destructive force. What else can it do but consume? I actually don't know if all of that's true about what they said about euthanizing alcoholics and depressives. If there's Europeans watching it from like the UK or somewhere where there's government-run healthcare, I believe France and other countries, do you have these laws that normally, people who aren't terminally ill can be basically killed? It's not quite as bad here yet, but we're getting there. We already kill hundreds of thousands of children in the womb, and we often speak with admiration of people who make the brave decision to commit suicide. And we already, in many instances, place the authority of the state over the rights of parents. Our education system is built around that philosophy. You don't have to go to the extreme that he's going to, but I think in general, can't we agree that life in general is something we should strive for? And even in the face of all odds, don't we want to continue to try to keep people alive as much as possible? And I don't mean just like, if someone's going to be completely brain dead but technically alive. No, I'm talking about keeping people alive in a sense that, hopefully we can learn how to keep people alive and functioning. And, the longer we go before giving up on that life, the more we can learn. And, that's the other thing. This isn't just about this child. If this child goes and gets a successful experimental surgery or whatever it is that they wanted to do on the baby, if that works, you now have something that you can do on many other children and possibly adults too to save a lot of lives. And so this is about more than just one baby too on top of it. And how does the government make that determination? Like, maybe the parents say, well, even if the child dies, if I go and get this research, then this experimental surgery, well, then, I'm going to further the human race effectively. But how does the government make that determination? Parents can make it for their kids, but when you have the government making that determination, both ways it can be terrible. Where they say, oh no, that's not worth the risk, or oh yeah, that is worth the risk. That can be just as bad too. So as I said, the stage is set. Prepare yourself for what's to come, and pray for Chris and Connie tonight. To see more from Matt Walsh, visit the channel on the Blaze. And I did have here's some of his tweets I wanted to go over. So this is his article he's talking about, and he wants to get the name Charlie Gard trending. It says, you guys euthanize animals and then throw them away. Wasteful. You may as well eat them if you're going to kill them, I say. Oh, that's in regards to PETA. But I guess he doesn't have... I can't find the good tweets right now, but... he did have some good ones there. So if you want to check out his Twitter timeline, you can go do that. So this is the problem. There are good things about government-run healthcare, but this is a huge problem. And there are more problems too. Like, when the NHS, when the doctors went on strike, and like even the doctors in the emergency room went on strike. So they brought in all these temporary doctors that weren't actually doctors to fill the positions, and they were going into like ER, and it was pretty ridiculous. And this was all over the government trying to make doctors work longer hours while slashing wages. And when you get the industry or when you get a protest and the doctors refuse to work, you're going to get the entire industry going on strike because it's all under the government for the most part. Now they have some small private stuff too, but for the most part their entire healthcare is under the government. And so in the United States, there is like Bellin is a huge, hospital around here. There's a big chain all over the nation. If their doctors all decide to go on strike, you're still going to have other hospitals to go to. You might create some longer lines, but it's not going to cripple the whole industry. So there are a lot of issues that I think people who are pro government run healthcare, a lot of times they overlook these situations and they never properly address them. Now, if this is completely biased and it's completely misleading, I looked for a more left-leaning article and I couldn't find anything yet. So this is kind of just breaking. So I'm going to keep my eyes open, and if I find any additional information, I'll make a new video, because, the Blaze can get ridiculous sometimes, and this is made very emotionally, but it sounds pretty legit, and if they really were prevented from coming to the United States for an experimental operation, that's really worrisome, and that kind of takes things to a new level. So anyways, I just want to let you guys know about this situation, and maybe there will be a trending on Twitter about this, but have a good one.